Forget the textbooks. Forget the quiet, dusty museums. Ancient Egypt was a land of staggering contrasts, extreme wealth, terrifying beliefs, and practices so bizarre they sound like something ripped from a fantasy novel. They had sophisticated medicine, but used dung for birth control. They built the pyramids, yet lived closer to the era of smartphones than their own monuments. We're diving deep behind the hieroglyphs to uncover the real, jaw-dropping truth. Get ready for the 10 craziest ancient Egyptian facts that the history books leave out. Number 1. Pharaohs commonly ejaculated into the Nile for a good harvest. This is perhaps the most sensational and profound example of how Egyptian mythology directly dictated state-level ritual and survival. The act of the pharaoh ceremonially ejaculating into the Nile River was not an act of crude public display. It was a deeply sacred, cosmic reenactment of creation itself. The Adam myth and the act of creation. The entire ritual stemmed from a cornerstone of Egyptian theology, the Heliopolitan creation myth. In this legend, the primordial creator god, Atum, or Adam, was alone in the watery chaos, Nun. To create the universe, Atum performed the first act of self-creation. He masturbated, or in some translations, spat or sneezed, but the masturbation interpretation is the most explicit and recurring. From this single powerful ejaculation came the twin gods, Shu, air, and Tefnut, moisture, who in turn began the creation of the cosmos. The pharaoh, being the living incarnation of the gods, specifically Horus and later Ra, was seen as the bridge between the divine and the mortal world. For the Nile River to flood, the essential event that determined the success of the harvest and the survival of the entire civilization, the pharaoh had to ritually channel the creative power of Atum. The act was typically performed during major festivals tied to the flooding cycle, such as the Festival of the Opet. The pharaoh would perform the sacred act near the river, ensuring that the Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt, received the literal semen of the creator god via his mortal representative. The sperm was seen as the magical, physical manifestation of life and fertility. If the pharaoh failed, the river would fail. If the river failed, the crops would fail, and the entire kingdom would starve. This single shocking act highlights the intense, literal belief that the pharaoh's bodily functions were directly responsible for the cosmos's survival. It wasn't merely a symbolic gesture. It was a necessary chemical, biological, and magical deposit to keep the world running. The success of the state rested on the pharaoh's fertility. Number 2. Cleopatra lived closer to the iPhone's invention than to the Great Pyramid's construction. This fact shatters the common perception of ancient Egypt as a single static historical block. The reality is that the span of pharaonic civilization is almost impossible to comprehend, making the time frame between its beginning and end nearly as vast as the time between its end and the present day. The staggering timeline. Let's break down the chronology to reveal the dizzying scale of this temporal gap. Construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza, Khufu, approximately 2560 BC, Old Kingdom. Death of Cleopatra VII, 30 BC, Ptolemaic period. The iPhone is invented or released 2007 AD, modern era. The Great Pyramid was over 2,530 years old when Cleopatra died. Cleopatra died only 2,037 years before the iPhone. This means that Cleopatra, the last active ruler of the Ptolemaic kingdom, viewed the Great Pyramid as an ancient relic, a monument that had stood for 2.5 centuries, older to her than the Roman Colosseum is to us today. When she saw the pyramids, she was looking at a history just as remote and monumental as we view her Roman conquerors. Cultural implications. The shock of this timeline reveals that the Egyptians themselves had their own ancient history. The New Kingdom pharaohs, like Tutankhamun, lived closer in time to the pyramid builders than Cleopatra did. This vast timeline means that Egyptian culture was constantly adapting, inventing, and reinventing itself over millennia. Cleopatra's Egypt was a Greek-speaking, cosmopolitan, Hellenistic kingdom, far removed culturally and politically from the builders of the Old Kingdom pyramids. This simple comparison of dates completely reframes our understanding of the duration and fluidity of one of the world's longest-lasting civilizations. Number 3. Ancient Egyptian women used barley and wheat seeds for prenatal sex prediction. Ancient Egyptian medicine was surprisingly advanced in some areas, yet simultaneously deeply superstitious and experimental in others. The practice of using grains to predict the sex of an unborn child is a perfect illustration of this mix of folk belief and empirical observation. The predictive ritual. This practice is documented in the Berlin Medical Papyrus, or possibly the Carlsberg Papyrus, indicating it was known, recorded medical procedure. The process was straightforward, yet based on a purely correlational magical principle. Preparation. A pregnant woman would collect her urine daily. Planting. She would urinate onto 2 separate cloth bags or small pots, one filled with barley seeds and one filled with wheat seeds. Prediction. The grains were then observed to see which sprouted first. If the barley sprouted first, the child would be a boy. If the wheat sprouted first, the child would be a girl. If neither sprouted, the woman was likely not pregnant. Scientific and cultural context. While the sex prediction itself is pure chance, the pregnancy test aspect is scientifically sound. Modern research conducted in the 1960s confirmed that the urine of a pregnant woman does sometimes contain hormones, estrogens, that can stimulate the growth of certain seeds, validating the "if neither sprouts" conclusion. The sex prediction aspect, however, was later linked to gendered associations with crops, barley often associated with male gods like Osiris, and wheat with female deities. This shows that the Egyptians were actively engaged in medical diagnostics, using readily available natural materials to try and solve fundamental human mysteries. It highlights a culture of experimentation, where even crude methods sometimes stumbled upon valid biological principles, wrapped up in the certainty of magical belief. Number 4. During mummification, ancient Egyptians removed the brain through the nostrils. The practice of mummification, the process by which a corpse was preserved for passage into the afterlife, is perhaps the most iconic feature of ancient Egyptian death rituals. Yet the specific methods for handling the brain are singularly gruesome and highlight a bizarre disregard for the organ modern science views as the seat of consciousness. The discarded organ. The Egyptians believed the heart was the seat of intelligence, emotion, and the soul, Ib, and therefore the heart had to remain in the body for the judgment process in the afterlife. The brain, however, was regarded as a useless, messy organ, simply a container of mucus or slime. Therefore it was discarded. The gruesome extraction. The removal process was meticulous and horrifying. Access. The embalmers would insert a long, thin, hooked implement, often a bronze rod, up through the deceased's nostrils. Liquefaction. The embalmer would use the hook to vigorously stir and break up the brain tissue inside the skull, turning the tissue into a semi-liquid state. Drainage. The body was then tilted, allowing the liquefied brain matter to drain out through the nasal passages. Flushing. The cranial cavity might be flushed with water, wine, or resins to ensure maximum removal. Implications of belief. This method of extraction, without cutting the head, which would have been a mark of disrespect, underscores their low opinion of the brain. The fact that they were so adept at removing a soft, messy organ through tiny apertures shows their incredible skill and dedication to the ritual of mummification. This fact is a chilling reminder of how differently ancient civilizations valued the organs of the body, discarding the one we now consider our entire identity. Number 5. Some pharaohs kept honey-covered slaves nearby to keep the pesky insects at bay. This bizarre fact speaks volumes about the extreme privilege, ingenuity, and ethical priorities of the Egyptian elite. Faced with the constant annoyance of flies and biting insects, which carried disease, the pharaohs devised a radical, living solution: the desperate measure. The most famous account of this practice is attributed to Pepi II, a pharaoh of the 6th dynasty whose incredibly long reign made him a legend. Pepi II, like many Egyptians, would have been constantly harassed by flies, gnats, and mosquitoes, not just an annoyance, but a serious threat in terms of disease transmission. The solution was a living, breathing flypaper. Servants or slaves, often the lowest-ranking individuals in the palace hierarchy, were stripped and slathered entirely in honey, or a sweet, sticky paste derived from dates or tree sap. These individuals were then positioned strategically in the proximity of the pharaoh during banquets, court sessions, or quiet time. The human fly trap. The effect was immediate and, for the slave, horrifying. The sweet coating acted as an irresistible bait for the local insect population. The flies would swarm the honey-coated human instead of landing on the divine pharaoh or contaminating his food and drink. This is a profoundly disturbing fact that perfectly encapsulates the absolute power of the pharaoh. The use of a fellow human being as a disposable, sticky object, a shield against minor discomfort, highlights a vast chasm between the divine elite and the common people. It shows that the pharaoh's status allowed him to employ the most ingenious and ethically bankrupt solutions to the most mundane problems. Number 6. Mourning the death of a cat. Owners shaved their eyebrows to show grief. While the pharaohs commanded life and death, the common people reserved a unique, visceral devotion for one creature: the cat. The cat held a sacred place in Egyptian society, often linked to the goddess Bastet, goddess of home, fertility, and protection, and their death was treated with the solemnity of a family member's passing. The sanctity of the feline. Cats were vital for controlling the vermin that plagued grain storage, protecting the national food supply, and therefore were seen as blessed animals. Killing a cat, even accidentally, was often a capital offense punishable by death. The moment a beloved family cat died, the family entered a prescribed period of intense mourning, publicly signaled by a dramatic act of mutilation: shaving. The entire family unit would shave off their entire eyebrows completely. Duration. They would then wear their faces eyebrow-less until their eyebrows grew back, a process that could take weeks or months. The public display of grief. This practice is documented by the Greek historian Herodotus, who traveled to Egypt. He noted that Egyptians shaved their eyebrows for cats, but only shaved their entire body for dogs. This specific, targeted act of shaving the eyebrows was a clear, immediate, and visible sign of grief and devotion to their feline companion, understood instantly by every person they encountered. This bizarre, specific ritual reveals the intense, almost religious bond the Egyptians had with their cats, a bond so profound that they were willing to publicly alter their appearance for months to honor it. Number 7. Women used crocodile dung and honey for birth control. Ancient Egyptian medical texts, particularly the Kahun Gynecological Papyrus, circa 1825 BC, reveal a fascinating and often terrifying array of treatments for women's health. The use of certain materials for contraception highlights their early, desperate, and often dangerous attempts at family planning. The contraceptive formula. The formula described in the text was used as a pessary, a device inserted into the vagina before intercourse. The ingredients included honey,
or sometimes natron, used as a sticky base and believed to have some spermicidal properties due to its acidity and sugar content. Crocodile dung. This was the horrifying active ingredient. It was mixed with the honey or natron to form a sticky, putty-like barrier. The mechanism of fear. The terrifying aspect of this method is, of course, the fecal matter and the potential for horrific infection. It's speculated that the dung's alkalinity may have acted as a barrier, but the primary function was likely physical. The sticky, dense mixture acted as a crude physical and chemical barrier, preventing the sperm from entering the cervix. However, the risk of introducing dangerous bacteria from the dung into the vaginal canal would have been extremely high, making this a terrifying gamble between unwanted pregnancy and potentially fatal infection.
Number 8. Salt was so valuable, it was used as currency and paid to workers. In ancient Egypt, the value of certain materials was determined not by scarcity or aesthetic beauty, but by practical necessity for life and religion. Salt, specifically natron, a naturally occurring mixture of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate, was literally the difference between survival and decay. The divine necessity, natron. The terror of natron's value was rooted in mummification. Natron was the principal chemical used to dry out the corpse, essential for preserving the body for the afterlife. Without natron, the body would rot and the soul would be lost forever. This religious necessity drove its value far beyond that of a mere seasoning. The economic necessity, salt. Beyond religion, common salt was crucial for preserving food, especially meat and fish, in a hot climate, and was necessary for metabolic function. Its scarcity in many regions made it an intensely valuable commodity. Its value reached the point where currency. It was used in everyday transactions, operating as a form of barter currency to purchase goods. Wages. It was not uncommon for workers, particularly those involved in difficult or important labor, such as the quarry workers, miners, or tomb builders, to be paid a portion of their wages in salt rations. This practice gave rise to the Latin term salarium, referring to salt payment, which is the etymological root of our modern word salary. This fact illustrates a unique economic reality where a common kitchen ingredient held the monetary and religious value of gold. Workers were literally paid in the currency of preservation, a necessity for their physical life and their spiritual afterlife. Number 9. New fact. People slept in temples to receive divine dreams for healing, temple sleep. This practice, known as incubation or temple sleep, demonstrates the intensely personal and mystical approach the Egyptians took to medicine, believing that the most effective diagnoses and cures came not from doctors, but directly from the gods during altered states of consciousness. The divine diagnostic, when a person suffered from a persistent, mysterious, or debilitating illness, they would bypass the mortal doctors and seek help from the divine. They would travel to specialized temples, often dedicated to Serapis or Imhotep, and perform rituals of purification and fasting. The core practice involved sleeping overnight within the sacred enclosure of the temple. The belief was that while the patient slept, the god would appear to them in a dream or a vision, offering one of two things: a direct cure. The patient might wake up completely healed or with the knowledge of a specific magical herb or treatment. A diagnosis. The god might reveal the cause of the illness, for example, a sin, a curse, or a specific physical ailment, that the priests or doctors could then treat. The psychological and magical terror. This practice highlights the terrifying nature of the Egyptian mind-body connection. The patient was intentionally placing themselves in a highly suggestible liminal state, expecting direct, unfiltered communication from a powerful deity. The dream could be healing, or it could be terrifying, a visitation from a vengeful spirit or a god demanding an unbearable sacrifice. It was the ultimate, direct consultation with the divine, a practice that blurs the line between psychological healing, religious terror, and magical cure. Number 10. New fact. The green and black eyeliner, kohl, was used as medical protection, not just beauty. The iconic thick black and green eyeliner worn by both Egyptian men and women, kohl, is often viewed purely as a cosmetic feature.
However, recent scientific analysis confirms that this beauty standard was also a sophisticated early form of preventative medicine. The toxic beauty standard. Kohl was not carbon-based like modern eyeliner. It was typically made from galena, a lead sulfide compound which gives the deep black color, or malachite, copper-based, which gives the green color. The terrifying part is that the compound contained lead, a toxic heavy metal. The medical purpose. The Egyptians were using these lead and copper compounds intentionally. The rationale was not merely aesthetic, but functional. Sun glare. The dark pigment reduced the intense glare of the desert sun, similar to modern sports players wearing under-eye black. Infection prevention. Most importantly, when the lead-based compounds were exposed to the skin's moisture and sweat, they created trace amounts of nitric oxide. Modern studies show that this chemical acts as a potent bacteria killer that could prevent serious eye infections and diseases, such as trachoma and conjunctivitis, that were rampant near the Nile. The Egyptians were therefore essentially wearing a low-grade preventative medication designed to keep their eyes healthy and ward off infection. This fact reveals a fascinating duality. They risked long-term lead poisoning for the benefit of immediate topical infection defense. They were literally wearing their medicine, proving that even their most stylish trends were born out of practical, scientific necessity. We've seen it all, from pharaohs turning slaves into sticky bug traps to ladies mixing honey and dung and the terrifying currency of salt. Now it's time to choose. Which of these 10 facts is the absolute craziest thing ancient Egyptians ever did? Was it the brain scoop, the eye shaving, or the temple sleep? Drop your vote in the comments below. If you're ready to see history through a shocking new lens, hit the like button and subscribe right now to join the community. Stay curious and keep questioning history.